first thing that you need to know is that you need to know the formula. You need to be able to do this formula. Basically, just looking at percent change, where you take what is new, subtract the old from it, divide by the old, and multiply by 100%. If the new value is larger than the old value, it's going to be positive. That means it's increasing. If the new value is less than the old value, it means it's decreasing. It's going to be negative. Just to give you an example, if Nike's stock price went from 160 to 115, you subtract 160 you do 115 to 160. This is wrong up there. 115 minus 160 would be a minus 45 because it went down, correct? It was a 28.1% change, but it'd be a minus 28.1% change. Does everyone follow that? And so you put the original minus and so forth. Any questions? It'd be new minus original over original multiplied by 100%. This one's wrong. Okay, so today what we're going to be talking about is agriculture. We're going to get about half to 2/3 of the way through it because I'm going to be talking about some of the things that are happening in our world. So I'm relating this unit with the population unit a little bit. On our planet, 1 in 7 people are hungry. Yet at the same time, we, especially as Americans, waste food. 1/3 of the food that is processed doesn't make it into our tummies. Either because of problems on the farm, or at the supermarket, or in your home. I'll admit myself that my kids don't always like what we fix and we throw some food away. At least once or twice a week I go to Ralph's, and I'm sure it's the same at every grocery store. And I go there to get food for Sherman, and I go to the produce section. I get leaf lettuce. Sometimes I go into the back, and in the back they have a box twice the size of this table right here, full of produce that people won't buy. It's apples that have a little dent in it. Still perfectly good. Tomatoes for whatever reason. So much lettuce because, people don't like the outside where people have touched it before. And so all that is there and just being thrown away. So what has happened is way off bounds, is that there are places now that are starting to process that. First place I've heard about that was Hyperion Wastewater Treatment Plant, a sewage plant where they take your waste and they process it. They get rid of all the solids and they put that into a container. And they take and put bacteria in there that break that down and make methane. And they ship that methane over to the power plant that's right next to them. And between 70 and 90% of the electricity that they use is powered by that methane. Another place I've heard about that is Glendale Electric. Glendale Electric gets 20 to 25% of the electricity, the materials for electricity, from the landfill that is right behind us. What is that called? Anyway, whatever it's called, between here and Eagle Rock. And the reason why is when we throw something away, it gets down there in there, and the water gets down in there, it starts decomposing. First time I heard about something like this was when I was your age in Arizona. One of the local golf courses was made over an old landfill. And someone was out playing golf. This is how they discovered that methane is being produced. And he had a 9-iron and he hit the ball. Well, he went a little bit under and hit a rock. And when he did, it was right at a methane bubble. And it blew him up. he died because there was methane from trash that basically did him in. And so after that, since that time, there have been legislation where in landfills, there are methods to collect that methane. And that's what's being done up at Shell Canyon, is they collect the methane and they use it to power. Well, farms are doing that also, where they are taking their waste either from, silage or waste from the, whatever, and they're making methane out of it. And one of the farms I read about it over the weekend actually makes enough to power their farm and 1,500 homes in that small town from waste material. But we need to do better at not wasting the material. We need to do better at making sure that the people around the planet get enough food. In America, 1.4 in 2008, 1.4 billion people were overweight. Probably most of them in Ohio and Indiana. No. And there were almost 1 billion people that were undernourished, where they did either because they didn't have enough nutrients or they did not have the right nutrients. What can we do? 98% of them live outside of high-income countries like United States, Japan, Germany. If we look at this graph, where green is where everyone is not hungry whatsoever, and red is where they're starving, going through orange and yellow, do those places look familiar from last unit? Where basically those populations that are underdeveloped are in demographic transition at this point in time, where they're having 6 kids and only 2 surviving, they don't have enough food. And we'll talk more about this later. Are there questions? One of the other things we need to look at is when we are growing things, 23% of the water we use, fresh water we use, goes to livestock. Not to grow crops directly, but to either grow the crops to feed the livestock or to water the livestock. If we got rid of livestock, we'd have almost 15% less methane and CO2. Why? Because cows fart and they burp, and that's methane. Second of all, remember the 10% rule? To get enough, if we got rid of all livestock, we'd have 10 times as many calories and 15 to 20%, 20 times as much protein as what we do now. Why? Because it's basically a waste. We can get all the nutrients we need without livestock. Food security means that you get enough food to survive, to be able to live, to be productive. Insecurity oftentimes happens in countries where it's not secure to live, or in areas where it's not always secure to live. That means you're not getting enough nutrients, you're not getting enough macro and micronutrients to be able to survive. And if we look at in the United States, we can see here that there are certain locations in the red where they are not necessarily getting enough food, where it's hard for them to get enough food, enough variation in their food to be completely healthy. This again is looking, where are there places where there's hunger? And again, exactly what I said before. Those are the undeveloped countries are not getting enough food. A lot of them are in locations that really don't like us. that have attacked us in the past because, oh, we're privileged. Causes of food insecurity. They're poor. They don't have the ability to make or buy the food. They're in an area that's undergoing a drought or extreme weather. They have lots of diseases and pests, either to themselves or to their food. And or they may be having a military conflict that interferes where everyone's looking out for killing everyone else as opposed to creating the food for everyone. Nutrition, what does it mean? For adults, a healthy diet means fruit, vegetable, something for protein, which would be legumes, beans, whatever. You need to have whole grains. You need potatoes and stuff like that. You need free sugars. You need free proteins, either whether meat or nuts and soy and stuff like that. You need fat. And you need micronutrients, which we'll talk about in a second. That's what we need to stay alive. We need energy, and we also need stuff to build us. Because where do your amino acids come from? Vast majority come from what you eat. So say you had a hamburger for lunch, your body is going to break down that hamburger into the amino acids, and then your body is going to take those amino acids and make you. Your carbon for a lot of your body comes from what you eat. 70 to 80% of the carbon in your body is originated in corn. We know that because there's a different type of isotope found in them. In corn, it's slightly different than any place else, and it's a different ratio, and that's what is in our bodies. Why is it from corn? Well, if you eat meat, they eat corn. If you eat like corn flakes or stuff like that, that has corn in it. And that's where we get a lot of our carbon for our bodies. Now, there are two types of nutrients. Like I said, macronutrients, which are the protein, carbohydrates, and fat, and the micronutrients. Macro ones are the ones where we break them down and reuse them. The micronutrients are ones we use. For example, iron. If we don't have enough iron in our body, we don't have enough iron for our hemoglobin. Sometimes the micronutrients would be vitamins that allow us to see, hear, be healthy. Or another macronutrient would be water. Do we have sufficient water to stay alive? Now, if you are chronically undernourished, you do not have enough nutrients to meet your basic energy needs. Why do those kids in the lower right-hand corner look so disgusting? Because the first thing that you are going to use if you are doing anything is sugar. You need energy to do anything. And the first place you get it from are carbohydrates, sugars. Second place you get it is fats. Well, these guys don't have any of those left, and so they're starting to break down their proteins, their muscles. And what's disturbing about it is if you look at this little kid right there, he has a big tummy. Not because he has a lot of food, but because he's breaking down the proteins in his body. When he breaks down the proteins, part of it goes to energy. The other half is ammonia. And is ammonia very good for you? No, it's a toxin. And so it goes to the part of the body that gets rid of toxins, and that's your liver. And his tummy is so big, not because he's overfed, but because his liver is overworking. And then look at their arms. There's nothing left. Chronic malnutrition means you don't have enough of anything, and these guys are going through a famine. Now, only 1 in 3 people have a deficiency in macronutrients, such as so forth. However, in micronutrients, they can cause problems. For example, if you don't have enough vitamin A, it can cause problems with your vision. If you don't have enough iodine, iodine is for the thyroid, is part of thyroxine. That is what helps control your metabolism. Well, this lady here is trying to be very healthy, but she doesn't have enough thyroxine. So her thyroid, which obviously is in her neck, is overworking. And it produces that thing right there called a goiter. That's why in the United States, most salt has iodine added to it. If you don't have enough proteins or iron, you're going to get anemia, meaning that your red blood cells are not going to be able to work properly. And therefore, you're going to have problems. Are there any questions? So, how do we solve that? One, we want to immunize children. Why do we want to immunize children? Because that way they don't die. Right now, there are multiple places in the United States where we're having measles epidemics because people are afraid of vaccines. Why? Because there was a fraudulent study done about 15, 20 years ago that indicated that if you get a vaccine, it's going to increase your chance of being autistic. Well, what's so bad about being autistic? They're different. They're a little bit different, but they're oftentimes people like Einstein, Tesla, the brilliant people on the planet, got us to where we are today. We want to encourage breastfeeding. Why? One, because when you are first born, you have no immune system. Your immune system is not functioning for the first 3 to 6 months of your life. And therefore, if you're not breastfeeding, the mother's breast milk has antibodies in it to help keep you from being sick. If you're not breastfeeding, sorry, you're more likely to get sick and die. Make sure if you do get diarrhea, that you have lots of water to make sure that you do not die. You want to prevent blindness by getting vitamin A to these countries. Want to provide family planning and education for women. Like what we saw on the last FRQ, I saw very, very well, is that if you educate women, they're going to go out into the working place. They're going to be more likely to get contraceptives. They're more likely to know, hey, I only want 2 kids. I don't want 6 or 7. I want to have a job so I can feed them. And therefore, our family is going to have enough money to be able to pay for all the goods that we need to live and survive as a family. Now, there are places, even in LA, where there are food deserts, where basically there is not the ability to get sufficient food. If we look at South Central, if we look at Harlem, various places like that, there are no supermarkets there. All there are fast food places and 7-Elevens. Are they going to get enough fruit and vegetables? No. Therefore, they're not going to get enough nutrients to be healthy, mentally or physically. So one of the things that is happening, like in Chicago, New York, other places, is that they have very, very good public transportation. We are very bad. We are a different model of city. Our city is spread out. New York, Chicago are fairly close in. They also have a public transportation system that is unbelievable. It is so good, it's not funny. And therefore, they're able to get out to places where they can get food. Or because there's good transportation, they're able to get food to those locations. They also have community gardens, where they have places either on top of the buildings. There are gardens on a lot of the buildings on top of them. Why? It keeps the building cooler, and 2, it's food available for people that are living there. This is just locating places where there are no supermarkets within a mile. Now, this is a little bit misleading. Certain places, it's not because of poverty, it's because there's just not a lot of people. When I lived in Minnesota, I lived in a town of 250. Was there enough for a supermarket there? No, not enough people there for a supermarket. We had to go about 30, 40 miles away to get to a supermarket. And we did that all the time. And if you're in North Dakota, you have to go a couple hundred miles away. And so they have very, very big freezers up there. Not just the middle of the winter, but in their basement. And they buy the stuff and store it and stuff like that. Now, some people are overweight. They're obese. They're overweight. And one of the problems is they eat too much, like what happened this last week with a lot of us, and we did not exercise enough. And therefore, they start getting overweight, and they start getting fat deposits on their body. Now, one of the problems with that is what happened with my dad. He had his first heart attack at age 35. Why? Because he had eggs and bacon every morning for breakfast. And he stopped exercising so much at about age 25, and he had his first heart attack at age 35, the next one about 48. Then he had a stroke. Why? Because on the lining of your arteries, you get fat deposits. And it solidifies, and for whatever reason, his second one was because he got hit by something, and some of that fat dislodged. Well, it goes along, and it clogged one of the arteries in the heart. Not getting enough food, oxygen stuff, and had a heart attack. His last one led to a stroke. He used to be brilliant, and afterwards he wasn't. So how and where are most of the foods produced? In the United States, worldwide, most of them is on farms, on cropland, where it's specific for a specific type of fruit, vegetable, grain, like San Joaquin Valley, like Iowa for corn. Rangelands are where we grow cattle, poultry, pigs, and we also have fisheries, either out in the ocean, or we have aquaculture, or we have even in some of the lakes, we can catch fish there. So, if we look at the amount of agricultural production, what does this thing say? Is there an increase in agricultural production in Africa? No, there's actually a decrease. But if we look at a world, it's gone up on a linear scale. It's gone up greatly worldwide. Now, if we look here, could I ask you a question about this? Does this look good? What's going to happen in the future? Are we going to start having maybe a surplus if we continue the way we are? Could you describe some things that could happen because of the world population versus the world food production? So some of the reasons why we have had that increase in food production is something called the Green Revolution. Green Revolution started back in the 20s and 30s, where we started having, instead of having to pull your plow with a horse or an ox, you had a tractor. Or you had a commercial fertilizer as opposed to manure. Or even more amazingly, was you had pesticides. Pesticides to get rid of all the stuff that was eating your stuff. Or to get rid of the stuff that was growing in your field that you didn't want growing in your field. Also, massive amounts of irrigation. Why? Because of electricity being available. Cultivated areas from 1900 to 2000 increased 33%, with energy inputs going up 80-fold. We therefore increased the amount of cropland, and we reduced the amount of pressure to go from forest to cropland, saving us from going even more deforestation than what we have. Some of the negatives is, we have more moo-moos, which means more methane and more CO2. We also have more pollution, either by the tractors themselves or from the cattle pooping into the water. Also because of a lot more farming, we've had erosion, salinization. What the heck's that? Salinization is when rain comes down, it comes down not as distilled water, but with ions in it, like sodium chloride. And when it evaporates up, the only thing that evaporates is distilled water. And it leaves that behind. There are places in the San Joaquin Valley where they cannot grow crops anymore because there's too much salt on the water, on the ground. So, worldwide, what has happened to the food we eat? There are only now basically 14 plants and 9 animals that supply most of what we eat worldwide. 3 grains make up vast majority of that: wheat, rice, and corn. If you think about what you eat, look at the ingredients, it's almost all wheat, rice, and corn, except for oatmeal. Worldwide, meat, milk, and cheese are consumed least. Why? Because a lot of the countries can't afford it. If we look at a meat eater, to eat a high amount of food, this is for a day, as a wholesale amount, it would cost that person $14.65 to eat on a wholesale. The vegan could spend about 1/3 less. Therefore, for the same amount of nutrients, they only have to spend about 1/2 to 2/3 of what the carnivore has to, the meat eater. Now, there are different types of agriculture, like industrialized. Industrialized ones are like what we saw on the Matrix, where you've got these great big huge farms, not the 150 acre one that my grandpa had back in 1920, where he had to do it with pulled by a horse and stuff like that. We've got tractors that are massive. We've got combines that are massive. High yield crops, heavy use of pesticides and fossil fuels because they go all over the place. And typically it's only one crop grown. Iowa is almost exclusively corn. That's it. Another way that we grow is plantation, where we grow crops to sell them directly. That's what is up in the San Joaquin Valley. They grow almonds, they grow figs, they grow avocados. Traditional would be developing countries where they've got the ox and the plow and a lot of human labor, but they grow 20, 30 things on their individual farm. Everything that they need to eat, they will grow on their farm. Questions? So if we look, where the green is industrialized agriculture. It's in the developed countries. Plantation and nomadic and traditional agriculture is in the developing countries. In the industrialized agriculture, we use so much fertilizer, it's not funny, so much electricity, so much diesel, it's not funny. And 70% of the water used worldwide is in agriculture. Why? To grow the crops and also to make sure that the crops that feed the crops, like the beef and cattle, can survive. Just another fact, industrialized food uses 17% of the energy in the United States. And most of the food doesn't stay local. If you live in Chicago, you get your avocados from California. If you live in New York, you get your avocados from California. This stuff has to be moved huge areas to go from the farm to the plate, which costs tons and tons of water. Typically, in an industrial agriculture, it's a monoculture where it's only one thing grown, produce high amount, easy to manage, but the problem is it reduces biodiversity. Not as many things growing in that area, more vulnerable to disease, to pests. Huge amount of fossil fuels, no biological controls, is very vulnerable to changing climates. Our farm belt is moving farther north because of global climate change. Another problem with monoculture is, if you've heard of the Irish potato famine, where they were only, even though there's hundreds of different types of potato, they were only growing one type. And when the fungus came in, it devastated every potato in the country. Therefore, they had no food, they died. That's why, one of the reasons there was such a huge immigration of Irish into certain places like Chicago and New York, because of the Irish potato blight. So one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we have food that will not succumb to a disease or a pest. And so what has happened is there is, in Norway, there is a seed bank where every type of food that we've ever eaten, every food plant, has seeds in that repository. So in case there is a problem with diseases to plants, or pests to plants, we can go and get seeds from here and the world will not starve. Now, one of the problems is, if you look here, the amount of insecticides, pesticides, and fungicides are going up. One of the reasons they're going up is because something called the treadmill, the pesticide treadmill. When you've got, the first time you spray an area with pesticide, you've got some of the organisms that are very susceptible to that pesticide, and they die. The ones that don't die are immune to it, will not be bothered by it. And so what you have to do is you have to crank the treadmill up a little higher. Because next time you spray, the ones that are immune to it are going to stay around. So you have to spray more. And then you have to spray more. And you have to spray more. Which is not only damaging the farmland, but it's getting into the water and affecting fish and things downstream. So if you spray, for example, a herbicide, something that kills plants, on a place and it goes down into the water, it's going to kill the plants in the water also. Now, one of the ways that we have dealt with that is something called genetically modified organisms. Where, for example, Monsanto, one of the evil companies in the world, whatever on my part, their main idea was, one, to make money, two, to make GMOs. And one of the things that they did is that they made their GMOs so that they could use Roundup, which is another one of their products. And what they did is they took a gene from a microorganism that was not affected by Roundup. And they put it into crops like corn, soybean. And then they planted it. And then they could spray as much Roundup as they wanted. And it would not affect the GMO. Problem with that is, if I'm a farmer right here, the center of the classroom, and over here, table 1, it doesn't have any genetically modified organisms on it, say mine's GMO corn, theirs is not GMO corn, pollen from my plants, from my GMO plants, may drift over to their fields. When it drifts over to their fields, they now have some of their product is GMO. Do you know what Monsanto does? They sue them for copyright infringement. I'm serious about this. They have sued farmers that have GMOs plants because of pollen going down. Kind of sad. Now, the other thing that happens is side effects. Because if we spray this plant with a herbicide, it can harm worms. It can hurt caterpillars. And it can hurt birds that eat these caterpillars. Or it can kill honeybees. And if we don't have any honeybees, we don't have a lot of plants left on the planet. So how are we changing this? How is biotechnology changing the world? One, it's big business. There's a lot of money in it. It also makes a lot of things better. For example, if this country at table 6, all of you were deficient in some amino acid, we could genetically modify a corn to supply or something that you eat, rice, whatever, with more of that specific amino acid and help you being healthy. That's one way that it can be good. But you also have the negative facts about GMOs. Are there questions? Now, a lot of these crops are Roundup ready. Why? Because a lot of them are made up by Monsanto. Have any of you heard the commercials on TV about Roundup? Asking if you have any cancers? Because it could have been caused by Roundup. Also, eating meats and fish has a significant impact on how much nutrients we have on the planet. Another thing you need to think about is feedlots. Just like what we saw in the videos, Matrix, a concentrated animal feeding operation, for example, that hen house. If we look at this table right here, where I could put enough chickens in here to grow enough eggs to be happy, but these chickens, under normal circumstances, instead of being in this small area right here, would be out foraging in a room, in an area probably 2 or 3 times the size of this classroom. And while they're doing that, they're going out and getting rid of a lot of the insects that would otherwise be affecting the farmland. So there are ways of doing this. And I won't go into the pigs because it just upsets me so much. Because pigs are very, very intelligent. There was a study one time where someone was trying to save money. And they put this little device in the pig area. And the pigs were trained to push on this little button whenever it got too hot. And so what they did is the farmer actually saved 50% on energy bill because the pigs were overheating before. And they went in and turned off the heat because they were too hot. Highly intelligent, and yet we eat them. Some of the benefits of feedlots is greater production of food in a smaller area. Replaces the impact on land area. Drawbacks, it contributes to air pollution. I went to Iowa State, which is in Ames, Iowa. The campus was south of one of these, a feedlot. I hated it whenever there was a wind from the north because you couldn't breathe because of the smell of the cow manure. Waste. Have you ever heard of E. coli poisoning or E. coli in the food? That's because of the E. coli going from feedlots into the water that is irrigation and getting onto the crops like spinach and stuff like that. The other thing is that, remember I talking about the treadmill effect? Same thing happens with antibiotics, where if I take antibiotics and I don't take I'm supposed to take them for 10 days and I only take them for 3 because I'm starting to feel better, I've gotten rid of all the weak ones. All the strong ones are still around, and I can infect other people. Or we give antibiotics to a livestock. The ones that survive are the bacteria that survive are the ones that are resistant to those same antibiotics. And if that bacteria gets in us, and so if you want to eat more sustainably, eat less beef. Why? Because we had to put 20 kilograms of food into the cow to get 1 pound of beef, 1 kilogram of beef. Or with a pig, it's only 7 kilograms for 1 kilogram. Whereas if we want to have chicken, it's 2.8 kilograms of food for 1 kilogram of chicken. And the environmental problems is that land and water are needed, but eggs and chickens require less area than beef. Are there questions? The other things we can do is we can look at eating other things. Instead of eating top sirloin, we could eat a grasshopper or a cockroach. Yeah. Again? Is it for Max?
Yeah. I think it's a different counselor.
Oh, Max Toten. So basically, a lot of people around the world, the only way that they get protein is by eating insects. Any questions? I'm done for the day. I will finish this up on Thursday.